Field notes on the human incident, being a complete account of the events of Stardate 7.441.09 aboard Way Station Orath, as recorded by Station Overseer 3rd Grade Torvel for the purposes of his formal disciplinary review. The humans arrived on a Tuesday. Torvel knew this because he had spent the preceding Monday making lists. He had lists about protocol. He had lists about dietary restrictions, cross-referenced with a separate list about which foods in the station commissary might constitute a biohazard if consumed by alien digestive systems. He had a list titled Potential Misunderstandings to Avoid, which had 17 bullet points, including one that simply read the handshake thing and another that read, do not mention the wars, any of them. He had a fourth list titled Contingency Measures, which had 3 items: contact the station medic preemptively, review the diplomatic incident response protocol, and breathe. He had been Overseer of Orath for 11 years. In that time, he had managed trade delegations from 9 species, 3 diplomatic incidents, 1 medical quarantine, and a structural failure in Docking Bay 4 that had technically been the fault of the Grievian Shipping Company, but had nonetheless generated a great deal of paperwork with his name on it. Orath was not a large station. It sat at the junction of 3 secondary trade corridors, too far from the inner systems to attract serious commercial traffic, and too far from the outer systems to attract serious trouble, which meant its staffing allocation reflected its official classification: minor, regional, adequate. It had a security complement of 4, 2 per shift, and a maintenance crew of 12. And Torvel had spent most of his career finding this sufficient because until now it had been. He had never hosted humans before. He had done some research. This, he would later understand, had not helped. From the working notes of Dr. Sela, Institute of Xenobehavioral Studies, in transit through Orath at the time of the incident, filed with this record at her request as supporting documentation. Initial assessment, unremarkable. They passed through customs without incident. Subsequent assessment, I was wrong about all of that. The first sign, Torvel reflected later, had been the cargo declaration. Dana Webb had handed it to him herself, with the efficient confidence of someone who had passed through a lot of customs checkpoints and expected this one to go smoothly. She was human tall and wearing the sort of professional expression that suggested she had specifically trained herself not to smile too widely because it made other species uncomfortable. Torvel had appreciated the consideration. Then he had read the form. "You have declared," he said carefully, "a live animal." "That's correct." "In the category of—" He checked the form again. "Personal comfort organism." That's one way to phrase it. "Ms. Webb, Orath is a working trade station. We have strict protocols regarding non-registered fauna. Any live animal must be subject to a 16-day quarantine period, 2 independent health assessments, and a behavioral evaluation conducted by a certified— I have all the paperwork." Dana reached out for a folder. It was very thick. Gremlin has current vaccinations, a certified behavioral report, transit health clearance from 3 independent veterinarians, and a letter of character reference from a Terran diplomat. Torvel looked at the folder. He looked at her. A letter of character reference. "Yes, for the cat," Dana replied. He opened the folder. The letter was on official Terran diplomatic letterhead. It described the animal: 1 Felis cartus, grey tabby, approximately 4 kilograms, named Gremlin, as even-tempered, well-socialized, and unlikely to cause problems. The letter had been signed and stamped. He read it twice. Then he read the accompanying health certificates. Then he read the behavioral evaluation, which was 8 pages long and included a section on the animal's response to novel environments that used the phrase calm curiosity 4 times. The quarantine requirement, he said, is still Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Orath Visitor Protocol, Dana said, permits an exemption for certified emotional support organisms provided the holder can demonstrate compliance with all standard health requirements. She paused. I had my legal team look at it. Torvald looked at the folder again. He thought about his potential misunderstandings to avoid list. He thought about diplomatic incident number 2, which had technically also started with paperwork. He ran the health certificates through the station's verification system. They came back clean. 3 independent veterinarians, current vaccinations, species-specific pathogen screening, all authenticated. He sent a copy to Voss for a secondary medical review. Voss's response came back within 4 minutes. Animal poses negligible biosecurity risk. Clearance recommended. Please advise if I should prepare for anything else. The exemption was technically valid. The paperwork was technically impeccable. Torvald did not enjoy the word technically as much as he once had. Welcome to Orath, he said. He watched her walk away. She moved with her weight centered and her shoulders loose, which he filed as confident walk, and which he would later learn was the specific posture of someone who had trained extensively to move in directions other than away. He would think about it later. The cat was grey. It was approximately the size of a large boot. It regarded Torvald upon being introduced in the corridor outside the human quarters with the specific expression of a creature that had decided, on some fundamental level, that the concept of rules did not apply to it. He had been assured repeatedly that it would stay in the humans' quarters. By the end of the first day, Gremlin had visited the commissary, the secondary engineering corridor, and the office of Station Medic Voss, where it had knocked a specimen jar off a shelf, watched it fall, and then looked at Voss with an expression that contained, as far as Torvald could interpret, no remorse whatsoever. Voss had spent the next 20 minutes filing a situation report, while the cat sat in the corner and cleaned its face. The report used the word incursion twice, which Torvald had flagged for revision, but he understood the impulse. It seems to have gotten out, said Dr. Lily Webb, Dana's younger sister, a wildlife xenobiologist in transit to a research posting, and Gremlin's registered keeper. Dana had handled the customs paperwork for all 3 of them, which struck Torvald as either professional habit or older sibling reflex. He found her in the commissary, calmly eating something orange and watching the cat attempt to climb on a Grievian cargo inspector. Yes, Torvald said, I can see that. She's very social. Lily picked up something from the table and offered it toward Gremlin with the ease of someone for whom this situation was entirely normal. She likes new places, new people especially. The Grievian inspector, Torvald said, is currently frozen in place because it believes the animal is attacking it. Lily looked over. The cargo inspector, a 4-limbed being of approximately 60 kilograms, was standing absolutely rigid while a 4-kilogram cat attempted to climb its back leg. Its upper eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Its lower eyes were fixed on the cat. It had not moved in several minutes. The cat had reached the second joint and appeared to be resting there, considering its options. She's not attacking it, Lily said. She's just curious. I'm aware of that. It is not aware of that. Should I? Please. Lily crossed to the inspector, extracted the cat, and tucked Gremlin under one arm in a single practiced motion. The cargo inspector made a sound that Torvald's translator rendered as I am uninjured. Please do not report this. I will be in my quarters. It then departed at a pace that was not quite running. She really is very friendly, Lily said. I don't doubt it, Torvald said. Please keep her in your quarters. She doesn't really do stay, Lily said. She knows what it means. She just weighs it against her other priorities. What are her other priorities? Lily considered this with the thoughtful expression of a xenobiologist confronting an honest question. Warmth, interesting smells, things that move, any surface above floor level. She paused. She prioritizes them more or less in that order. Torvald looked at the cat. The cat looked at him. I'll have a talk with her, Lily said. Thank you, Torvald said. He went back to his office and added 4 lines to his list. The next morning, one of the Chelvan maintenance workers had constructed a small bed out of packing foam and thermal wrap and installed it near the heating vent in Corridor 7. It had the cat's name written on it in careful Chelvan script. Torvald stood in front of it for a long moment. He filed it under ongoing situation and moved on. By the second day, Gremlin had made 3 additional friends. 2 were the maintenance workers. The third was Tim Webb, the brother, a mechanical systems specialist traveling on a commercial transit permit, which Torvald found confusing because Tim lived with the cat and presumably already knew her. She follows me, Tim explained, when Torvald found him in the engineering access corridor with the cat sitting on his toolkit watching him work. Tim was currently elbow-deep in an open panel that Torvald was fairly sure he had not been asked to open. I don't know why. I'm not even her human. That's Lily's department. He looked at Gremlin. Gremlin looked at him. She just likes it when I work. I think it's the tools. I see, Torvald said. He looked at the panel. Mr. Webb, that is a station environmental regulator. Yeah, your secondary coolant return was cycling about 9% above spec. Chelvan made, right? The 400 series has a known issue with the bypass valve housing. Gets a burr on the seating surface after a few thousand thermal cycles. He did something with the tool Torvald didn't recognize. Something clicked. The faint hum that Torvald had heard in this corridor for approximately 3 years and had assumed was normal changed pitch, dropped and disappeared. There! That should run quieter now. Torvald looked at the now silent panel. He looked at Tim, who was wiping his hands on his trousers, and appeared to consider this a normal way to spend one's time aboard a station where one was a guest. You just fixed it, Torvald said. That will cause some paperwork, but thank you. It was bothering me. I could hear it from our quarters. Tim shrugged. Can't walk past a thing that sounds wrong. Dana says it's a condition. Want to pet her? I'm fine. She's very soft. Torvald looked at the cat. The cat looked at him with the patient expression of a creature that had time to wait. Thank you, Torvald said. I have reports to file. He went back to his office. The next morning he added soft, possibly to the bottom of a different list, and then deleted it immediately. On the same afternoon, Torvald had passed through the main corridor and noticed Dana in brief conversation with Officer Maret near the security checkpoint. It appeared to be nothing. Dana had asked something about the station's emergency assembly points, and Maret had answered with the professional directness of someone giving a routine safety briefing. They had spoken for perhaps 2 minutes. Torvald had noted the interaction only because Dana had, as far as he had observed, not spoken to any of the security staff before that point. Maret, for her part, had seemed mildly surprised to be asked, but had answered fully. They had exchanged the small nod of 2 professionals, who recognized something in each other's bearing and moved on. Torvald had filed this as situational awareness, visitor, and thought nothing else about it. From the working notes of Dr. Sela continued. Hypothesis: the human practice of keeping small predators as companions may be a form of social signaling. Humans who carry or are accompanied by carnivorous animals project an implicit message of domesticated danger. That is, I have tamed something that could hurt you, and it is fond of me. This may function as an unconscious dominance display. Counter-hypothesis. They just like cats. Current evidence supports both equally. Further observation required. On the third day, Tim Webb brought something into the commissary. It was a small, dark glass bottle with a handwritten label that read, "Tim's Do Not Touch," in 3 languages, one of which was human English, and 2 of which appeared to be preemptive warnings in Chelvan and Grevian, suggesting Tim had done this before in a variety of locations and had developed a standard approach. He unscrewed the cap and tipped it onto whatever he was eating. The smell hit the commissary approximately 2 seconds later. Torvel was not in the commissary at the time. He heard about it afterward from 6 separate individuals, whose accounts differed primarily in which specific phrase they had used, for the moment they realized something had changed in the air. The Grevian cargo inspector, now recovered from the cat incident and perhaps looking for a fresh start, had left the room immediately. 3 Chelvan workers with no cat-related trauma had done the same. A Preth communications officer had reported a burning sensation in her secondary breathing apparatus and filed it as a workplace hazard. Station medic Voss had filed a report using the word incursion again, which at this point Torvill felt was becoming a habit. Dana had been sitting next to Tim when he opened the bottle. According to her account, she had said, "Oh, you brought the good stuff," and asked for some. She had also, according to the Preth communications officer's own account, been the one to walk over when the officer's secondary breathing apparatus flared up, calmly take her by the arm, steer her toward ventilation, and talk her through the next 2 minutes with the practiced steadiness of someone who had managed a crisis in a room before and did not find this one especially remarkable. The Preth officer described her afterward as very capable and possibly military or something adjacent. Torvill had read this and filed it under personality trait. He wished later that he had filed it under something more specific. Afterward, while the commissary was being ventilated, Torvill had passed the human quarters on his rounds and seen Dana helping Tim rearrange something in their temporary storage bay. Tim had been trying to shift a loaded cargo pallet that had been blocking access to the equipment lockers. A 2-person job minimum, given the size. Dana had taken the other end without being asked and moved it in a single coordinated lift that covered 3 meters of deck plating in about 2 seconds. She had done this while continuing a conversation about coffee. Tim had not appeared to find any of this unusual. Torvel had noted it, filed it alongside the other observations, and continued his rounds. "It is," Torvel said, standing in his office doorway while Voss explained the medical report to him. "A condiment?" "Capsaicin-based," Voss confirmed, "derived from a class of plants that the human digestive and pain-sensing systems have apparently co-evolved to experience as pleasurable. The compound activates the same neural pathways as they eat it on purpose. They appear to enjoy it. Both of them. Mr. Webb offered some to his sister as well. She declined. She was busy with the cat at that point. He then offered some to a Chelvan dock worker who had been sitting nearby." Torvel closed his eyes briefly. "And?" "He's fine. He described it as an experience. He has since asked Mr. Webb for the name of the source." Torvill looked out his window at the docking bay for a long moment. 3 human beings, 1 cat, 1 bottle of biological agent, and they had been here for 72 hours. "Ask Mr. Webb to keep the bottle sealed when he's in shared areas," Torvel said. "I already spoke to him. He was very cooperative about it, sealed it himself, apologized, said, 'I always forget it does that to people who haven't had it before.' He kept it on him, but the cap is staying on." Voss paused. "I did suggest he might leave it in his quarters. He looked at me as though I had proposed something fundamentally unreasonable. He won't leave it. He will not leave it. He appears to consider it a personal item in the same category as his identification or his toolkit. Lily confirmed that he has carried it in his jacket pocket through customs on at least 9 stations. It goes where he goes. Voss paused again. He also left a small amount in a sealed container for the dock worker who was interested. I logged it as a gift transfer. Of course he did, Torvell said. He added 2 more lines to his list and underlined them both. Voss lingered in the doorway. One more item. Yes? I briefed Mr. Webb on the effects. Standard procedure when a personal item causes a biosecurity notice. Showed him the species sensitivity chart for the compound. He was actually quite interested. Voss consulted his datapad. Asked which species had the strongest reaction. I told him Korath, cool climate obligates, northern coastal evolutionary origin. Their respiratory and ocular membranes are fully exposed. No secondary filtration layer, no nictitating membrane. Anything volatile in the air hits them directly. Voss paused. He went very quiet for a moment, then said, "So, for a Korath, this would be like..." And I said, "Considerably worse than what happened to the Preth officer," and he said, "Right, okay, cap stays on," and wrote something in his datapad. What did he write? I didn't ask, but he was very serious about it. Repeated the species name twice, like he was filing it. Voss closed his datapad. I'm satisfied he understands the risk. He takes the safety aspect more seriously than I expected. Torvell looked at him. Voss looked back with the neutral expression of a medical professional who was simply being thorough. Thank you, Voss, Torvell said. Of course. From the working notes of Dr. Seller, continued. Note, the human predilection for consuming substances that trigger pain receptors is well documented and apparently widespread. I remain uncertain whether this represents dysfunction or adaptation. What I am increasingly certain of is that it makes humans harder to frighten than other species. I did not anticipate that this hypothesis would be tested by pirates. The Iron Jaw docked at 14:07 station time on the 4th day. It declared itself as a routine freight carrier, which Torvell had believed until it wasn't, and then it was too late. 5 individuals in mismatched armor came through the docking corridor, the lead one announcing in 3 languages that Orath was now under the authority of the Free Commerce Collective, and that all personnel should move to the central atrium and remain calm. They were pirates. Torvell moved to the central atrium. He was an overseer, not a security officer. Orath's security complement was 4, but the day shift had just rotated. Officers Marit and Sen were in the atrium, armed and present, and Officers Dukal and Fine were at the far end of the station in the security office, which the pirates had sealed from the outside by cutting the corridor junction's blast door control. The 2 officers in the atrium were looking at the weapons being pointed at them with the careful expression of people doing the math and finding it unhelpful. 43 station personnel. 3 visitors under transit permit, 1 animal under animal transit permit, and Dr. Seeler, who was standing with her notepad and appeared to be taking notes. 5 pirates with weapons, 2 officers with sidearms they hadn't drawn because the math said not to. Not good. 2 of the pirates had walked down the line collecting anything that looked like a weapon or communications device, tossing items into a pile with the bored confidence of people who had done this before and were not particularly thorough about it. They took the security officer's sidearms, several data pads, and a toolkit from a maintenance worker. One of them ran a scanner down the line. Korath-made, standard tactical model, designed for detecting powered weapons and active electronics. Tim's jacket pocket contained a glass bottle, a sealed cap, and nothing that generated an electromagnetic signature. The scanner passed over it without pause. The pirate moved on. Torvell watched that happen and thought nothing of it. Tim, he noticed, had watched it too. Tim had looked at the pirate operating the scanner, then at the pirate's face. The exposed membranes, the wide-set ocular surfaces, the species features that were distinctive if you knew what you were looking at. Tim's expression had not changed exactly, but something behind it had. He had touched the front of his jacket, a small motion, barely a gesture, and then his hand had dropped back to his side. Torvell had seen it, but had not understood it. He filed it as nerves. He was wrong. The pirate leader, Drav, he announced himself, as if this were a networking event, walked down the line of assembled hostages with the confidence of someone who did this regularly and found it easy. He was large. He was visibly armed. He was giving a speech about leverage and compliance and the efficient transfer of cargo manifests, and he was doing it with the bored fluency of someone who had refined this particular speech down to its essential components. He stopped in front of the humans. Torvell, 6 people down the line, watched. Dana was listening to the speech with the expression of a professional who was professionally evaluating it. Her arms were loose at her sides, and her weight was slightly forward. The same centered stance Torvell had noticed at customs, though in this context it read differently. Tim had his arms crossed and was watching Drav the way a person watches a process that is taking longer than expected. Lily had Gremlin, who was sitting on her arm and regarding the pirates with calm, amber eyes. Drav looked at the cat. "Why," he said, "do you have that?" "She's my cat," Lily said. "Felis catus, domesticated subspecies. She's friendly." Drav stared at the animal. The animal stared back. He clearly knew in the abstract what it was. Cats appeared on enough Terran cargo manifests and station registries. But knowing what a thing was called and having it look at you were different operations, and whatever Drav found in that stare apparently gave him pause. The flat, golden eyes, the contained stillness of a creature that was not alarmed, had not been alarmed, and had no particular plans to become alarmed on account of him. "Put it away," Drav said. "She doesn't really do away," Lily said. "She weighs it against her other priorities." A beat. "It is," Drav said slowly. "A hostage situation. I know, she's aware. She's fine with it." Drav looked at Dana. Dana returned his look with the expression of a diplomat who had been in stranger rooms than this and was waiting to see where this one went. He looked at Tim, who looked back with the specific blankness of a man who was thinking about something and was not going to share it. He looked at the cat again. The cat blinked once, slowly, in the universal feline gesture that meant approximately, "You exist, and I have assessed you, and I have returned to my normal concerns." Drav moved on, the smallest of the 5, way smaller than the rest. Armor poorly fitted, weapon held a little too high and a little too tight, had been assigned to watch the near end of the hostage line, which included the humans. He kept looking at the cat. He kept looking away. He kept looking back. Gremlin, who had been cataloguing the room's scent profile from Lily's arm, had noticed him noticing her and was now watching him with the attentive focus of a creature that had identified the most interesting thing in its vicinity and intended to monitor it. Torvell watched him recalibrate visibly and thought, something is going to happen. He did not know what it was going to be. He was fairly sure it was not going to be on his contingency measures list. He was correct. What happened next took approximately 40 minutes. Torvald's formal report described it as a cascading series of human-initiated interventions. This was accurate in the sense that it was factually defensible, while conveying almost nothing useful about the experience of being present for it. It started with the cat. Gremlin had been restless since the pirates arrived. Lily had been holding her for nearly 20 minutes by the time things changed, and anyone who had spent time with Gremlin over the preceding days could have told you that 20 minutes was approximately 15 minutes longer than Gremlin considered acceptable when there were new smells in a room and she had not yet investigated them. Lily had been shifting her grip steadily, adjusting, compensating, and losing ground in the slow, patient way that all cat owners eventually lose ground. At approximately 14:31, Lily stopped adjusting. She looked at Gremlin, who was focused, body-taut, already orienting toward the young pirate who had been watching her for the past 10 minutes and who had, evidently, eaten something recently that had left traces in his environmental suit seams. Lily looked at the pirate. She looked at the room, at Dana, whose weight had shifted forward by a degree that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 3 days watching her move. At Tim, whose hand had drifted casually to the front of his jacket in the way a person touches a pocket to confirm something is still there. Lily was a xenobiologist. She had spent her career studying how animals behaved in unfamiliar environments and how unfamiliar environments behaved around animals. She knew what Gremlin would do when released into a room full of novel stimuli. She had known it since the moment the pirates arrived. She opened her arms. Gremlin dropped to the floor without sound and moved toward the interesting smells. The young pirate looked down at the animal approaching him. He looked at the animal's eyes, which were fixed on him with the undivided attention of something that was not afraid and had never considered that it should be. He looked at the way it moved, low, fluid, direct, without hesitation. And whatever part of his brain was responsible for categorizing living things apparently returned an answer he had not been expecting. The young pirate, already nervous, already watching, already rattled by 20 minutes of a 4-kilogram animal staring at him with calm, amber eyes, moved backward, then sideways, then into another pirate. In the resulting disruption, which Torvald's report described again as localized disarray, Tim had apparently decided that an opportunity existed and that he might as well use it. He pulled the bottle from his jacket, flicked the cap with his thumb, and splashed it deliberately, accurately, and with the specific wrist motion of someone who had used this particular bottle in a great many contexts and knew exactly how it poured across the exposed face of the nearest pirate. The compound hit exposed Korath membranes directly. Korath physiology, cool northern coastal adaptation, fully exposed respiratory and ocular membranes with no secondary filtration, prey diet historically absent of capsicum genus or any comparable irritants, responded to concentrated capsaicin with what Voss's subsequent report described as acute ocular and respiratory distress, immediate onset. What Voss's report did not convey, being a medical document, was the sound. Torvald had been prepared professionally for many things. He had not been prepared for that particular sound. He would not have had a category for it, even if he had tried. Tim pivoted toward the second and got the angle wrong. The pirate had already started turning when the disruption began, and the source caught the side of his jaw and one membrane instead of his full face. It was enough to stagger him, but not enough to drop him. He swung an arm blindly and caught Tim across the shoulder, hard enough to knock the bottle from Tim's hand. It hit the deck and rolled. Tim went sideways into a supply rack, recovered his footing, and did the only thing he apparently could think to do. He grabbed the loose edge of the pirate's collar and pulled the fabric up across the pirate's already burning eye, grinding the residue in. The pirate went down. Dana moved while the second one was falling. This was where Torvell understood very clearly that he had been wrong about Dana Webb from the moment she walked through his customs checkpoint. He had seen a diplomat. The title was accurate. What it had failed to convey, 11 years of Terran Consortium trade negotiations, a significant portion of which had taken place in stations and outposts, where trade dispute was managed with somewhat more physicality than standard. The way she had moved on arrival, weight-centered, shoulders loose, eyes tracking every exit and uniform in the room, wasn't tourist awareness. She had also, this came out in her own account afterward, specifically positioned herself near the two security officers when Drav lined everyone up. Not by accident. She had caught Officer Marrett's eye twice in the preceding 20 minutes, once when the pirates were collecting weapons, and once approximately 30 seconds before the cat hit the floor. Marrett, in her own account, described the second look as clear, and not entirely surprising, given their conversation the day before. "I already had a sense of what she was," Marrett said in her debrief. "When she looked at me, I understood what she meant." Sen, standing next to Marrett, had seen it too. They had been waiting. Dana moved through the room in the specific way of someone executing a plan they had already built, adjusted for current conditions, and decided to commit to. Marrett and Sen, who had spent 20 minutes doing the math and wishing it came out differently, found that the math had changed. Drav was first. Dana had been standing 3 people away from him and closed the distance before he had finished processing the fact that the cat was on the floor and 2 of his crew were on their knees. What happened next was brief, efficient, and not clean. Drav was large and armed, and he did not go quietly. He managed to get one hand on Dana's arm before she redirected it, and in the process, she took an elbow to the ribs that she would not mention until Voss found the bruising during the post-incident check and insisted on documenting it. She did not appear to have registered it as significant at the time. Marrett and Sen were there within seconds, and between the 3 of them, the encounter lasted perhaps 8 seconds. Torvell watched the security recording afterward, 3 times. It had not looked like a fight. It had looked like a very brief, very consequential negotiation in which one party had considerably more information than the other and used it efficiently. The next minute was, as Torvell's report put it, dynamic. A 4th pirate, seeing Drav go down, had rushed toward the group and been intercepted by Sen with a tackle that sent them both into a cargo rack. Sen came out of it with a cut above one eye and the pirate's weapon in his hand, which was a favorable exchange rate by most measures. By the end of this minute, Drav and one other pirate had been restrained by Dana and the security officers, working in a coordination that had been built on exchanged looks, one prior conversation, and shared instinct rather than formal planning, which was not the same as no communication at all. 2 more were on the floor contending with the effects of direct capsaicin exposure. The compound had rendered them, as Voss would note in his medical report, operationally irrelevant. Tim was sitting against the supply rack where he'd been knocked, flexing his right hand experimentally and looking at the bottle on the floor 3 meters away with the expression of a man calculating whether it had survived the fall. The young pirate, the one who had been watching the cat, the one who had been nervous from the start, the one whose ill-fitting armor suggested he had not been doing this for very long, had backed into a far corner during the disruption. His crew was down. The sounds coming from the 2 on the floor were not encouraging. The cat was sitting between him and the rest of the room, cleaning her face with the unhurried focus of a creature attending to routine maintenance. He had his weapon pointed at it. The cat did not appear to have registered this as relevant. He looked at the weapon. He looked at the cat, visibly afraid to death. He lowered the weapon. When the security officers reached him, he surrendered with what they described as visible relief. At 14:47, station time, 5 restrained pirates, 2 still wheezing. Torval stood in his atrium and looked at his station, which was intact. He looked at his personnel, shaken but present. He looked at the 3 humans. Tim, who had recapped the retrieved bottle and was holding an ice compress to his shoulder while checking something on his datapad. Lily, who had been retrieving Gremlin from the middle of the room, paused beside the young pirate on her way back. She asked him, with genuine research interest, whether he had seen the cat and what he had thought it was. He added lines to his report. He crossed out catastrophically insufficient and replaced it with resolved. He stared at that word for a while. Then he went to find Voss. From the working notes of Dr. Seller, Draft 1, revised substantially. Initial hypothesis, disproved. Second hypothesis, partially supported, but insufficiently specific. Current conclusion to be expanded in the full paper. Humans are not harder to frighten than other species in the technical sense. They are frightened. They simply proceed anyway, with an equanimity that suggests they have made a decision at some prior point in their evolutionary development that being frightened of things is not a reason to stop moving toward them. Whether this represents a dysfunction, an adaptation, or something that does not map cleanly onto our existing taxonomies of behavioral profiles is a question I intend to spend considerable time on. Secondary conclusion: do not under any circumstances allow humans to become bored. The consequences appear to be incalculable. Note: added prior to departure, I have spent the last 20 minutes with the cat, who was sitting in the docking bay while the humans loaded their shuttle. The maintenance workers were correct. She is very soft. I have added a footnote on felid pack bonding behavior as an appendix, as it is directly relevant to the paper's conclusions, and I have now conducted primary research on the subject. The formal commendation took 11 minutes. This was because the form was 6 pages, and Torval had filled it in by hand, done so in the 2 hours between the pirates being escorted to the secure holding area and the humans' departure window. He had also, in those same 2 hours, filed an incident report, 3 medical update requests, a secure hold processing form for 5 individuals, and a special circumstances notation explaining why one of the 5 prisoners had specifically requested to be placed in a holding cell with no line of sight to the common area, and why this request had been granted. The common area was where the cat was. Torval felt the request was reasonable. As the humans were leaving, he presented a personal commendation at 1600 in the docking bay while the shuttle was being loaded. Dana accepted it with the precise warmth of someone who did this regularly and meant it anyway. "Thank you. The station has been very welcoming." She was holding herself carefully. The ribs, Torval suspected. Voss had cleared her to travel, but recommended a follow-up scan at her next port of call. She had nodded once, filed the recommendation, and not mentioned it again. "You have very good coffee, by the way, the best I've had outside the inner systems." He hadn't known they'd tried the coffee. He made a note to tell the commissary operator. Then the docking bay was quiet. Torval stood there for a moment, with the particular silence of a space that had recently held something and now didn't. Then he went back to his office and began the follow-up paperwork, which was going to take several days, and which he was going to file under incident type human visit, because apparently that was now a category that required its own documentation tree. He saved the draft. He stared at it. He opened his personal notes, found the document titled Potential Misunderstandings to Avoid, and added one final line at the bottom. "The cat, actually, is fine." Then he went to get some of the coffee. End of record. Incident 7.44.1.09, Way Station Orath. Filed by Overseer 3rd Grade Torval. Status: closed.